good evening. This is the Midnight Audio Channel. Tonight's special episode is a non-stop experiment in interpretation, where we unravel the hidden messages in Natsume Soseki's 10 Nights of Dreams, one night at a time. Without readings, we'll spend several hours discussing the background of the work and its historical context. Whether as background noise during late-night work or as an intellectual exploration on a quiet night, simply listen to the words as they flow. After listening to all 10 explanations, your perspective on the reality we live in might have changed slightly. Now, let's begin with the interpretation of the first night. 10 Nights of Dreams, Commentary. The mystery of the first night. Why was the man able to live 100 years in a single night? The truth of eternity and a day. An eternity of 100 years was locked within a single night's dream. A tale of ultimate love that breaks free from the spell of time. Introduction. Eternity in a Day. Are you familiar with the film Eternity in a Day? This work, which won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival, is a story about an old poet facing death the next day from a terminal illness, who reflects on his life through an aimless journey with an unknown refugee boy. In this film, there is a striking scene where his wife once asks, "How long is tomorrow?" And the protagonist answers, "Eternity and a day." It is a word of resolve from one facing imminent death, expressing the intent to live by condensing their entire past life, that is, eternity, into the brief one day they have left. Actually, there is a deep spiritual resonance between this film and the first night of Natsume Soseki's 10 Nights of Dreams. This is because both stories depict the collapse of the boundary between the objective time ticked away by a clock and the subjective time experienced by the heart. Just as the film's protagonist saw eternity in a single day, the man depicted by Soseki locked an eternity of 100 years within a single night's dream. This time, I would like to delve deep into this beautiful yet mysterious fantastical tale from the three perspectives of religion, physics, and philosophy, to unravel the mystery of time that bound the man. Perspective 1. Religious perspective, Eastern reincarnation, and Western resurrection. The first is the perspective of religion. The man places the woman, who says, "When I die, please bury me," into a hole dug with a pearl oyster shell, and places a fragment of a star as a tombstone. A shell born from the sea, the source of life, and a star that fell from the cosmos or the heavens. This can be said to be a preparation for the Shinto or Buddhist reincarnation, returning the woman's body not simply to the earth, but to the macroscopic cycle of the great universe. On the other hand, applying a Christian perspective instantly deepens the meaning of the pure white lily that blooms 100 years later. In Christianity, the white lily is a symbol of the Virgin Mary, representing purity and innocence. Furthermore, a lily blooming in spring is also a symbol of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. The development where the woman, who quietly accepted, "I am going to die soon," reappears as a white lily after a long sleep, is exactly a Christian resurrection itself. The plump drop of dew falling onto the lily from far above represents grace or holy water from heaven, and the man's act of kissing it evokes a ritual of a sacred vow. The return to Eastern nature and the pure Western resurrection. Soseki depicts a magnificent religious fusion in this burial scene. Perspective 2. Physical perspective. Time travel of compressed time. The second is the perspective of physics. The greatest mystery is the true nature of the time of 100 years that the man spent waiting on the moss. As Einstein's theory of relativity shows, time does not flow equally for everyone. It stretches and shrinks depending on the state of the observer. The time of REM sleep, when humans dream, is nothing more than a few minutes to tens of minutes, according to the hands of a real-world clock. However, in a dream where stimuli from the outside world are cut off, and the synapses in the brain reconstruct memories at a furious speed, the information processing speed accelerates to the absolute limit. The man continues to count 1, 2, as the red sun rises from the east and sets in the west. This is exactly human reason, desperately trying to apply the logic of reality to a dream world where the laws of physics do not apply. Even though it is an event of a mere single night on a real-world bed, an enormous amount of time, 100 years, is being calculated inside the brain. It can be explained physically that the 100 years the man experienced was an eternity of time travel compressed to the absolute limit, created by the locked room of a dream. Perspective 3. Philosophical perspective, Bergson's pure duration. The last is the perspective of philosophy. The French philosopher Henri Bergson called the objective time that can be ticked away and measured by a clock spatialized time, and the subjective continuous time that humans live inwardly, pure duration. At first, the man tried to measure time with an objective indicator, the light and shadow of the sun. However, no matter how much he counted, the promised day did not come, and he fell into despair, thinking, "Might I have been deceived?" Bound by clock-like time, at the very moment his reason was about to collapse, a green stem grew from beneath the stone, and a white lily bloomed. When he suddenly looked up at the sky and saw the morning star twinkling, he murmured, 100 years had already arrived. This was not a realization because the clock struck 100 years. It is the moment he existentially awakened to the fact that the weight of his continuous inner experience of suffering and waiting to the limits of his spirit had finally reached 100 years. 100 years had already arrived. At this moment of realization, the man was finally and completely released from the spell of time, brought about by the hands of a clock. The massive amount of time of 100 years was, in fact, equivalent in value to the momentary event of a single white lily blooming. This equivalent exchange of time is the true essence of this fantastical tale, narrating the strength of human love and will. Let us return to the film Eternity and a Day, introduced at the beginning. Just as the film's protagonist imbued his remaining one day with eternity, the man's resolve, in response to the first-night woman's question, "Can you wait?" was also a readiness to live an endless present that continues until the promise is fulfilled, rather than living on calendar time. That single night, when the man continued to count the suns on the moss, was not mere endurance. It was the duration of one long now, leading up to the moment his loved one was reborn, an eternal process to complete their love. How long is tomorrow? Eternity and a day. Perhaps what Natsume Soseki infused into the first night of 10 Nights of Dreams was also such a tale of a single night's love, compressed to the absolute limit, that could be called eternity. Ten Nights of Dreams Commentary. The Mystery of the Second Night. Why couldn't the samurai attain Mu? The Paradox of Madness and Frustration. The White Bear Trap and the madness of the second night. Hello everyone. In our project to deeply analyze Natsume Soseki's 10 Nights of Dreams, this time we are covering the commentary on the second night. A complete turn from the tranquil first night that depicted eternal love, the second night is a story like a psychological thriller enveloped in a stinging sense of tension and a frustration resembling madness. In psychology, there is a famous concept known as the ironic process theory, commonly known as the white bear experiment. It is a phenomenon where if you are told, whatever you do not think about a white bear, the brain ironically ends up thinking of nothing but white bears. The samurai, the protagonist of the second night, was caught in exactly this psychological trap. The more desperately he tries to attain mu, thinking of nothing, the more his mind becomes filled with the intense consciousness of having to become mu. This time, through the figure of the samurai, who was verbally abused by the priest and risked his life trying to attain mu, we will unravel the mysteries of what exactly is mu and how could he have attained enlightenment. Perspective 1. Why did the priest say, if you are a samurai, you can attain it? Early in the story, the priest throws these words at the samurai. You are a samurai. If you are a samurai, there is no reason why you cannot attain enlightenment. Why did the priest declare that if he is a samurai, he can become mu, attain enlightenment? That is because the original existence of a samurai always lives side by side with death, and possesses the resolve to instantly discard any attachment, ego, to their own life when the time comes. As the saying goes, the way of the warrior is found in death. Severing the attachment to life is the very aesthetic of a samurai. A samurai capable of emptying oneself should be the closest to the Zen state of mu. However, what about this protagonist? While sitting in Zen meditation, he shouts in his heart, I will attain enlightenment. I must take that kettle head, the priest's head. Attaining enlightenment in Zen means letting go of the self, ego. Yet he is attempting to attain it using his pride as a samurai and his desire for revenge against the priest, the most powerful forms of self-attachment, as his driving force. He has fallen into a complete paradox, like being on a treadmill, where the faster he runs, the further he gets from the goal. So, what exactly was the mu that the samurai was supposed to reach in the first place? The trap many people fall into here is treating mu as the same as the mathematical zero. Humanity's discovery of zero was a highly advanced intellectual function that gave form and concept to a state of nothingness in order to recognize it. In other words, the state of recognizing that there is a zero is a state in which human reason is operating at full capacity. The samurai, too, used his high intellect to create a box called mu, zero, and tried to force himself into it, thinking, all right, there is nothing right now, or I am maintaining a state of zero. However, at the very moment he is observing zero in his head like that, the intense consciousness of the self, observing it, already exists there. True mu is a state where even the concept of zero and the self observing it have vanished. He tried to forcefully hack the Zen state of mu, which requires letting go of intellect, by using humanity's powerful weapons of intellect and reason. Precisely because he tried to be smart and logical, he entangled himself in an absolutely unsolvable paradox. Perspective 3. How could the samurai have attained mu? How, then, could the samurai have become Mu? The answer is simple: to abandon the very purpose of trying to attain enlightenment. During Zen meditation, he gets angry at the smell of incense, thinking, even though I said Mu, there was still the smell of incense. At this moment, it is precisely because he resists, trying to erase the smell of the incense, that ripples form in his mind. If there was a smell, he should have simply accepted it as, there is the smell of incense, and let it flow away. The moment he let go of the purpose of killing the priest and his honor as a samurai, simply accepting himself exactly as he was, he could have escaped the white bear trap and attained true Mu. Perspective 4. The Western clock cornering the samurai. However, he did not have the grace period to accept that. The man in the first night waited 100 years within the relaxed cycle of the great nature of the sun. However, what rules the samurai in the second night is the table clock chiming ding in the adjoining room. This clock can be interpreted as a symbol of the Western rationality and the speed of modernization that flooded Japan during the Meiji and Taisho periods. The samurai, who once lived within the time of nature, is cornered, frustrated, and ultimately destroys himself by the mechanical time carved out in minutes and seconds. Soseki's own suffering, his nerves frayed by the waves of modernization, may be projected into this depiction. Even as he tries to sever his 5 senses, the reality of the incense scent stubbornly pulls him back. And then, mercilessly, the clock chimes. While the man in the first night was released from the spell of time and kissed the lily, the samurai in the second night remained bound by the spell of the clock's chime until the very end, reaching for his dagger. It is the tragic end of a man who chased the shadow of Mu, a shadow that vanishes the moment it is put into words. This sounds almost like a sharp warning from Soseki to us, who suffer in modern society from inflated egos, constantly rushed with messages like, "Don't waste time," and "Be someone." How did you perceive the outcome of this samurai in his extreme state? Please let me know in the comments section. Ten Nights of Dreams Commentary. The Terror of the Third Night. Why did the child on his back become heavy? The truth behind the century-old sin and the mirror. Introduction. Are you carrying the past or a sin? Have you ever wanted to run away from your own past? The third night of Natsume Soseki's 10 Nights of Dreams is the most eerie story in the series, and the one that most sharply confronts us with human nature. On a dark rice-field path at night, a man is walking while carrying his blind child on his back. However, the child sees right through the man's heart and coldly whispers, "You'll find me heavy soon." This time, we will dive deep into this chilling tale from the 3 perspectives of psychology, Buddhism, and contrast, ultimately unraveling the true nature of the weight of the stone Jizo that the man faced. Perspective 1. Psychological perspective. The child as a mirror and the repressed. The first is the perspective of psychology. Soseki describes this child as shining, like a mirror that reflected my entire past, present, and future, without omitting a single fact. In other words, this child is not an actual other person, but rather the embodiment of guilt repressed deep within the protagonist's psyche. In psychology, there is a concept called the return of the repressed. Inconvenient memories and sins that a person tries to forget do not simply vanish. They change form and reappear before their eyes. The more desperately the man tries to abandon the child, the more talkative the child becomes, blocking the man's escape routes. The faster you run to escape your shadow, sin, the darker the shadow becomes, clinging to your feet. It can be said that this child was the man's own inescapable conscience. Perspective 2. Buddhist and historical perspective, the trap of the 100 years contrast. The second is the meaning of time, seen through the contrast with the first night. In the first night, the woman told the man, "Please wait for 100 years." And the man continued to wait those 100 years for the fulfillment of love. The 100 years there was a light of hope. However, in the third night, the child accuses the man, saying, "It was exactly 100 years ago today that you killed me, wasn't it?" In contrast to the 100 years of love in the first night, the third night is the 100 years of grudge. Soseki's depicted the exact same unit of 100 years with such a cruel contrast. What is important here is the specific era name, the 5th year of Bunka. This suggests the continuity of historical karma, rather than just a simple dream. Even though we think we are living our own individual lives, aren't we actually continuing to carry the invisible karmic ties of the past? The terror of Buddhist karmic retribution, cause and effect, lies here. Perspective 3. Symbolic perspective. Transformation into a stone Jizo and the gravity of truth. Finally, let's discuss the weight at the ending. The moment the man realized, "I was a murderer," the child suddenly became as heavy as a stone Jizo statue. Why a stone Jizo? A Jizo, guardian deity of children, is originally a Buddha of compassion, who protects children and saves sinners. However, the moment he admits his sin, that symbol of compassion transforms into a weight of condemnation that crushes the man. The child, who was light as long as the man deceived himself with the lie of forgetfulness, bears down on the man as inescapable gravity the moment he accepts the truth. This weight is the very weight of the facts that the man must bear. To know the truth is, at the same time, to take on that responsibility. By expressing the awakening of memory as a physical weight, Soseki depicted the inescapability of sin. What are we carrying? The man in the first night was released from the spell of time and enveloped in the scent of lilies. In contrast, the man in the third night was pulled back by the spell of time to the memory of the murder he committed, losing any place to escape. Father, am I heavy? This question is not directed only at the man in the story. Don't we too have something on our backs that we pretend not to see in our daily lives? The third night that Soseki wrote might be a story meant to make us look once more into the mirror, at our own shadow that we constantly avert our eyes from. Ten Nights of Dreams Commentary. The Depths of the Fourth Night. Why is the snake an umbilical cord? The lost source of life and the loneliness left behind. Introduction: a daydream with no boundaries. Many of the nights in 10 Nights of Dreams begin with, "I had a dream like this," but this phrase is absent in the fourth night. The reader is suddenly thrown into a scene of a mysterious old man sitting on a dirt floor, without any time for mental preparation. This presentation blurs the boundary between reality and a dream, creating a unique buoyancy that drifts throughout the story. Perspective 1. deep inside the navel, the hometown of life. The old man says his home is deep inside the navel. The navel is the source of life's energy, where we were once connected to our mothers. The old man can be considered a mythological symbol, emerging from the place where our lives began, or the great mother source, rather than an actual human being. Perspective 2. The mystery of the new interpretation. Snake equals umbilical cord. The most crucial point here is the true identity of the snake the old man tried to show. The old man twisted the hand towel long and thin, like a kanji muri, a tightly twisted paper string, and placed it on the ground. This shape is the very embodiment of the umbilical cord connecting mother and child. While blowing his whistle, the old man repeated, "It will turn into a snake soon," but ultimately, the snake never moved. This likely suggests that in the rational world of modernization, the Meiji era, we have lost our connection to the source of life, the womb, nature, and mystery. The Meiji era was a time when modern factories and companies emerged, prompting people to leave the farming villages, places rooted in the earth, where their families had lived for generations, to migrate to the cities. They were physically severed from their roots, their hometown soil, ancestral graves, and sacred village forests, which should have been as deeply connected to them as deep inside the navel. Instead, they were forced to endure the loneliness of living as isolated individuals in towns built of concrete and brick. The people of that time must have felt this uprooting from their community and the earth, brought about by urbanization, deep in their bones. The umbilical cord, the snake, that once connected us to the source of life, has become nothing more than a lifeless, motionless hand towel. This is a profoundly tragic metaphor. Perspective 3. Return to the river of amniotic fluid. Finally, the old man wades splashing into the river and disappears while singing. It gets deeper, it turns to night, it goes straight. If the snake is the umbilical cord, this river becomes a metaphor for the amniotic fluid, the origin of life. The old man did not go away to some unknown place. He returned to the place where we were born, the original home of life. At the end of the story, I, who is a child, continues to wait all alone for the old man to emerge. After the magic connected to the source of life has vanished, and the old man, the source, has departed, we are left completely alone in a rational world, having lost that connection. That quiet loneliness and the helplessness of having no choice but to wait forever are the true nature of the sense of loss, flowing at the foundation of the fourth night. The fourth night begins with an abrupt scene description, lacking the phrase, "I had a dream like this," which is synonymous with the series. A mysterious old man sitting on a dirt floor says his home is deep inside the navel, foretells the miracle of turning a hand towel into a snake, and then vanishes into the river. Flowing deep within this work is a profound sense of loss regarding the source of life. Might the snake that the old man tried to show, but which did not move, be a metaphor for the umbilical cord that once connected us to the mother's womb? As the old man returns to the river that resembles amniotic fluid, the figure of the child, waiting alone on the riverbank for a miracle, quietly reflects the loneliness of modern people who have lost their fundamental bonds in a rational modern society. This daydream-like story asks us, across the ages, where we came from and what we have left behind. 10 Nights of Dreams, Natsume Soseki, The Fifth Night Interpretation Experiment. The Reversal of Myth and Eternal Hatred. I had a dream like this. The fifth night opens with this familiar phrase, which was broken in the fourth night. The stage instantly leaps to a wild mythological world, a time close to the age of the gods. A giant enemy general with connected eyebrows, marking a clear departure from the modern landscape seen so far. And the extreme situation of being forced to choose life or death by the bonfire. This time, we will conduct an interpretation experiment to unravel this beautiful yet gruesome tale from the unique perspective of the reverse mythology structure. Verification 1. The reversed hero archetype. Throughout ages and cultures, myths have a golden pattern. Like Orpheus in Greek mythology or Izanagi in Japanese mythology. It's a story of a man who goes to rescue his loved one from the underworld. However, Soseki brilliantly reversed this structure. The protagonist of this work is a defeated prisoner of war, a thoroughly passive existence who can do nothing but sit cross-legged on the grass and wait for death. Conversely, the woman is the one who acts proactively. She leaps onto a barebacked horse without a saddle and gallops through the darkness, making the horse breathe pillar-like breaths of fire. From the man who goes to rescue to the man who can only wait. This reversal gives the story an inescapable sense of frustration and impatience. Verification 2. The unreasonableness of the Amano-jaku. Many tragedies in myths are depicted as the result of reaping what one sows by breaking a taboo oneself, such as do not look back. However, what tears the fifth night apart is not a mistake made by the two lovers. It is a single lie, the mimicking of a rooster's crow by an Amano-jaku lurking by the roadside. That is pure external malice. No matter how deeply they love each other or how much effort they put in, everything is destroyed by the whimsical prank of a completely unrelated third party. This absurdity is the true nature of the despair at the core of this dream. Consideration. Negative eternity, carved in rock. Despairing at the rooster's cry, the woman plunges into a deep abyss. At the end of the story, the protagonist declares, as long as these hoofprints remain carved into the rock, the Amano-jaku is my sworn enemy. The first night depicted an eternal love of waiting 100 years. However, what is presented in this fifth night is an eternal hatred that will never fade, just like the scars carved into the rock. If he had lost her due to his own mistake, he might have been able to accept it by blaming himself. However, the sorrow of being robbed so unreasonably loses its outlet and is sublimated into pure hatred. How did you find the commentary on the fifth night? In the first night, we saw a story of ultimate romantic love, the quiet, eternal act of waiting for 100 years. In stark contrast, the fifth night hurls at us a never-ending eternal hatred on a grand mythological scale. It portrays the sheer helplessness of a human being who can do nothing but wait in the darkness, and the merciless intervention of Amano-jaku, the embodiment of unreasonable fate. By daring to reverse the classical mythological structure, Soseki visualized the anger and sorrow toward the absurdities we suddenly face in life. As the painful hoofprints gouge deeply into the rock, it is truly striking how 10 Nights of Dreams transcends being a mere collection of beautiful fantasies and sharply depicts the light and shadow lurking in the depths of the human heart. The white lily of the first night and the hoofprints left by the dark abyss of the fifth note. This vivid contrast may be the very essence of the immeasurable depth of Soseki's literature. The next story is The Sixth Night. It continues with the famous tale of Unkei carving the Neo statues. A completely different and mysterious landscape awaits, where the modern and the classical intersect. Let us continue to dive together into the depths of the dream world left behind by Soseki. Thank you for joining me until the end. Please share your interpretations in the comments section. Ten Nights of Dreams, the Sixth Night Interpretation Experiment. The modern age is dead, and the past is alive. The strange landscape of Gokokuji. Unkei, a genius Buddhist sculptor from the Kamakura period, appears at the main gate of Gokokuji Temple in Meiji-era Tokyo. The sixth night, which begins with this highly surreal setting, appears at first glance to be a humorous tale. However, hidden in its depths is a cruel and sharp prophecy for modern society, left behind by Soseki. This time, we will conduct an interpretation experiment to unravel this story from the shocking perspective of the modern age is dead and the past is alive. Verification 1. The genius of the past and the uncomprehending crowd. In the story, Unkei of the Kamakura period carves the Neo with an overwhelming vitality, as if he is still alive today. On the other hand, the Meiji crowd surrounding him is depicted as spiritually dead and empty, even though they appear to be alive. They can only discuss art in terms of superficial comparisons of labor and physical strength, saying things like, "It must be a lot more work than making a real human being," and they say he's even stronger than Yamato Takeru no Mikoto. This can be said to be a symbol of the dead modern man who lacks the spiritual foundation to understand true essence. Is there anyone among us who truly understands the principles of why an airplane, invented over 100 years ago, can fly? We may be doing nothing more than conveniently and amusingly consuming the technology and art that geniuses of the past whittled away their lives to create. The crowd staring curiously at Unkei is the very embodiment of the empty modern man, who, while enjoying an advanced civilization, has lost the ability to comprehend its essence, spirit. Verification 2. The tragedy of standardized firewood. Witnessing Unkei's divine skill, the protagonist, I, gets the idea that if it's just a matter of digging out a Neo buried in the wood, I can do it too. However, no matter how much he carves the firewood behind his house, no Neo appears. What we must note here is that what he tried to carve was firewood. Firewood is standardized wood, cut to uniform lengths to burn efficiently. This can also be seen as a metaphor for modern human resources. Humans have been sawed into convenient shapes by the woodcutter of modern education, which pursues efficiency and rationality. It is impossible for a Neo with unique, unparalleled strength to be born from such standardized firewood. Digging and digging, yet finding no talent. Perhaps this is because we have voluntarily severed the spiritual soil capable of housing art. Consideration: the reversed form of life. At the end of the story, the protagonist realizes that Neos are simply not buried in the wood of the Meiji era, and comes to understand why Unkei has lived until this day. A striking phenomenon of reversal by Soseki is depicted here. The Meiji people, who are supposed to be living in the now, are dead entities who have lost the eyes to see the essence and only consume. In contrast, Unkei, who should have died centuries ago, stands there as a living entity who finds truth within the wood. The past continues to live vividly, while the present is dead in nothingness. The reason why Unkei lives to this day, it is none other than because the truth he touches possesses a universal vitality that transcends time. In the Meiji era, people's values rapidly shifted from invisible spirituality to visible numbers and efficiency. Soseki, in his lectures, such as The Development of Modern Japan, strongly criticized Japan's modernization as an externally induced one forced upon it by the West. This is because, amidst rapid westernization, people stopped creating from within and grew entirely accustomed to simply consuming the convenient civilization that came from outside. To their eyes, which had come to measure the world solely by efficiency and cost performance, the figures of gods and Buddhas dwelling within the wood could no longer be seen. Conclusion: what is buried inside the wood around us today? Is it the real thing, waiting for someone to dig it out someday? Or is it empty firewood, just waiting to burn to ashes? If Unkei were to appear before us in the modern world, what would he carve out from our hearts? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments section.
Because it was an externally induced modernization, borrowed civilization.
Soseki, in his lectures such as The Development of Modern Japan, strongly criticized Japan's modernization as an externally induced one forced upon it by the West, in contrast to the West's modernization, which naturally developed from within as internally induced. People stopped taking the time to carve truth or form out of their own spiritual soil inside the wood, and ended up merely importing and using, consuming, the already completed systems, technologies, and values from the West. This is the biggest reason why they became dead consumers, with no power to create on their own, because they were dominated by the metrics of efficiency and practicality. In the Meiji era, as capitalism and modernization surged in, people's values rapidly shifted from invisible spirituality to visible numbers and efficiency. This is why the onlookers in the script evaluate art based on the amount of labor, saying it must be a lot more work than making a real human being, or compare it by physical strength, saying they say he's even stronger than Yamato Takeru no Mikoto. Even art and religion could only be measured by practical metrics such as cost performance, amount of labor, and specs, strength. This spiritual impoverishment is exactly the state of having lost one's eyes, because they severed their connection with nature, gods and Buddhas, continuity from the fifth night. In the fifth night, we discussed how modernization caused the loss of connection to the source of life, the umbilical cord. That theme continues here in the sixth night. It was once believed that gods and Buddhas, Neo, dwelled within wood. However, to the Meiji people steeped in rationalism, wood is now merely timber, nothing more than firewood to be burned efficiently. As a result of losing their sense of mystery and awe, and coming to view the world merely as resources or materials, the Neo, essence that should be inside the wood, has become forever invisible. It is because, amidst rapid westernization, they stopped creating from within, and grew entirely accustomed to simply consuming the convenient civilization that came from outside. To their eyes, which had come to measure the world solely by efficiency and cost performance, the figures of gods and Buddhas dwelling within the wood could no longer be seen. I believe this script will be a masterpiece that leaves a strong, lingering impact on the viewers, as a story about us today. It is perfectly fine to proceed to recording as is. It has a wonderful level of completeness. Interpretation experiment. The Seventh Night, Black Hole Regret, and the Reversal of Time. The Seventh Night of 10 Nights of Dreams is a story set on a large ship with no known destination, filled with intense anxiety and culminating in an overwhelming surge of regret. In this experiment, we will analyze this story through its contrast with the first night and the lens of the modern physical concept of a black hole. Verification 1. The reversal of time with the first night. First, we must note the brilliant contrast in time compared to the first night. In the first night, a vast span of 100 years spent waiting for a loved one passed as if compressed into a single moment. This was a phenomenon where hope for a reunion accelerated time. In the seventh night, however, the exact opposite occurs. The time from when the protagonist jumps from the deck until he reaches the Black Sea surface is physically only a few seconds. Yet the fierce regret of, "I wish I hadn't done it," that strikes the moment his feet leave the deck, stretches those few seconds into an infinite fall. If hope turns 100 years into a moment, despair turns seconds into eternity. Soseki illustrates through these two nights that human emotions can freely manipulate the length of time. Verification 2. The gravity of regret, like a black hole. This description of a fall where one cannot easily reach the water's surface is strikingly similar to the modern concept of a black hole. The closer one gets to the center of a black hole, the more time is warped by intense gravity, appearing from the outside as if one is falling forever. For the protagonist of the seventh night, the sea surface is the very event horizon of a black hole. The thought of "I wish I hadn't done it," a regret far too heavy, became a massive gravitational force that seized the protagonist's spirit, causing his subjective time to expand to the limit. Perhaps the pitch-black sea was not mere water, but a dark gravitational field created by inescapable regret. Consideration, a warning to the modern desire to reset. We sometimes find ourselves driven by the impulse to flee from where we are now, to throw everything away and reset our lives. However, that split-second decision might drag you into a black hole of eternal regret. Once your feet leave the deck, they can never return. Hints for finding happiness. The answer for living a happy life emerges by combining these two nights. No one knows where the ship of society or life we are on will end up. There will be days when we are crushed by anxiety and driven by the impulse to escape. However, it is in those moments that, like the man in the first night, holding a hope of one's own, a lily flower within the heart becomes our salvation. Though the destination is invisible, do not leave the ship. Wait patiently for what your heart believes in to bud. Accepting an uncertain world as uncertain, yet never letting go of hope. That is the most powerful message for our happiness that Soseki hid at the bottom of the deep despair in 10 Nights of Dreams. Ten Nights of Dreams. The Eighth Night. Interpretation experiment. The patchwork in the mirror and the scissors that tick away time. The entrance to the extraordinary hidden in the ordinary. When I crossed the threshold of the barber shop, 3 or 4 men in white clothes who had been standing stiffly all said, "Welcome," at once. The stage for the 8th night is a very ordinary place, a barber shop, a stark contrast to the fantastical worlds we've seen so far. However, the moment we sit down in the chair in front of the mirror, we should realize it. We realize that this is a bizarre observatory reflecting all the distortions of the rapidly changing Meiji era. In this interpretation experiment, let's decode the confused identity trapped in the mirror and the true nature of the scissors that mercilessly tick away time. Verification 1. The ticking scissors and the passive bystander. I, sitting in the barber's chair, covered with a white cloth, cannot move a single step. He is a passive bystander who observes society only through the screen of the mirror, rather than looking directly at the outside world. What we should pay attention to here is the snip-snip sound of the scissors, continuously ringing near his ear. The protagonist asks the barber, "Well, will I amount to anything? Will I be able to adapt to the coming new era? Will I become a person of value?" This is an acute anxiety peculiar to intellectuals. However, the man in the white clothes does not answer. He simply continues to sound the scissors, mercilessly and precisely. This sound is the second hand of the clock called modernization, advancing without ever stopping. Every time the scissors snip, a part of his old self, his hair, is cut off and flutters down. Unable to bear the terror of being forcibly remade into the shape of a new era, the protagonist closes his eyes. Verification 2. The loop and the stopped world, a sense of time gone mad. In the world inside the mirror, the flow of time is experiencing a glitch. In the back at the counter, a large woman is counting 10-yen bills at incredible speed. Even after counting 100 bills, she starts counting over again from the beginning. This is the loop of the endless desire known as capitalism. On the other hand, outside the window are people whose time has stopped. The tofu vendor, who seems frozen, as if permanently stung by a bee on his cheek. And the goldfish vendor, who continues to stare at his goldfish without moving a muscle amidst the noisy street. The endlessly accelerating loop of capitalism, and the people who, unable to keep up with its speed, have completely frozen and dropped out of society. The 8th night depicts how the wave of modernization shatters and collapses the human psychological sense of time. Verification 3. The patchwork of Meiji society. The people passing by in the mirror are a patchwork of the contradictions that Japanese society held at the time. Shotaro, walking proudly in his Panama hat, is a symbol of superficial westernization, high collar. In contrast, the geisha appearing with a sleepy face and no makeup represents the exhausted, raw underside of Japan's fading traditions. What should we gain, and what should we lose? Amidst rapid westernization, people who have lost their identities, unsure of what is right, cross paths mechanically and disappear within the frame of the mirror. The reason the protagonist repeatedly asks, "Will I amount to anything?" is perhaps because he has lost sight of where he himself should be stitched into this distorted patchwork. Consideration. A question to the immobile self. At the end of the story, the protagonist leaves the shop and stares endlessly at the motionless goldfish vendor. This might have been a strange sense of empathy toward an existence that chose to stop amidst a chaotic society. We in the modern era are also bystanders to an ever-accelerating society through the mirrors of social media and mass media. when the speed of flowing information threatens to drive your own sense of time mad, or when you feel a sense of powerlessness, as if tied to a chair, not knowing what to gain and what to discard. How will you answer the snip-snip sound of the scissors continually ringing in your ears? Conclusion. What Soseki imbued into that barber's chair was the very chaos of living in an era with no right answers. When your hair is cut and you step outside the mirror, will the scenery you see have amounted to anything? Next is the 9th night. Let us proceed into the darkness of the shrine, where a mother's deep passions swirl. Interpretation experiment. The 9th night. Why did he have such a dream? The ultimate closeness born from deprivation. The closeness drawn by a lonely childhood. Among Natsume Soseki's 10 nights of dreams, the 9th night stands out as an anomaly. While the other nights begin with the phrase, "I had a dream like this," this night alone closes with the confession, "I heard such a sad story from my mother in a dream." Soseki was sent out to a foster home shortly after birth, and grew up harboring the loneliness of an unwanted child, bouncing between adoptive parents. He was overly interfered with by his adoptive father as a tool for worldly success, and his ties with his biological parents were frail. In his actual life, Soseki never had the experience of being unconditionally protected or held closely by anyone. For him, the setting of a 3-year-old self, clinging to his mother's back and sleeping in her warmth, was perhaps a reconstruction of the lost paradise he yearned for all his life. The 3-year-old child surrenders to the comforting sway on his mother's back. Physically, it is the shortest possible distance. He is as closely attached to his mother as one could possibly be. However, that closeness is built upon a cruel contradiction. The mother is a lonely planet wandering in the darkness of despair, having lost her son, her husband, father. Even while plastered to his mother's back, the child is entirely spared from bathing in the deadly poison of the time lag of death that resides within her heart. Soseki deliberately depicted himself as an ignorant star that knows nothing. The more the mother performs her 100-fold visits to the shrine in hellish agony, the more those vibrations lull the child into a deep sleep. The irony that the mother's despair maintains the child's peace. This is likely a metaphor for the fundamental loneliness, being closely attached to a parent, yet never being able to touch their truth, drawn by Soseki, who doubted parental love and was exposed to a distorted affection, masquerading as expectation. The father in the story is a tragic samurai who fought for a noble cause and was killed by roaming warriors. However, for the real Soseki, his adoptive father, Shonosuke, was an unlovable figure who destroyed their family through infidelity and treated him like a mere tool. In the 9th night, Soseki may have rewritten the real unlovable father into a father who died for a noble cause, and he created the idol of a young mother who prays desperately for that father at the risk of her life. The figure of a mother who carries me on her back and prays with all her heart, which never existed in reality. It is perhaps his unreached yearning for his biological mother, whom he lost when he was 14, taking on a different form. I heard such a sad story from my mother in a dream. With this final sentence, the story is sublimated from reality into reminiscence. The deceased mother appears at the bedside of the adult Soseki in a dream and confesses the truth. Your father was already dead at that time, but because you were sleeping on my back, I was able to keep walking. This is a belated confession, a message of reconciliation from the mother to the son who slept innocently on her back. The destination of the mother's prayers might indeed have been nothingness. However, what his adult self learned was the fact that, while praying to the dead, you continued to warm me, the living, on your back. No matter how emotionally distant and ignorant Star he was, that warmth on her back was the only absolute truth Soseki ever attained. That night, on my mother's back, I was watching a fading sun from a place as distant as the edge of the universe. Now that I have grown up, I finally touch that heat, and with a burning pain, learn the true nature of that night. The unreached prayers, and the warmth that certainly did reach him. The final dream Soseki depicted might have been a quiet requiem to gently bridge the distance between himself and the parents who abandoned him, the parents who forced their expectations on him, and the parent who died without truly seeing him. Interpretation experiment. The 10th night, the hell of the bystander, and the I who lost the protagonist role. It is finally the last night of Natsume Soseki's 10 Nights of Dreams. The beautiful yet bizarre journey that began with, I had a dream like this, reaches its destination in this 10th night with a highly surreal and somewhat comical story. The protagonist, Shotaro, is abducted by a mysterious woman, fights continuously for 7 days and 6 nights against an endlessly emerging herd of pigs on a cliff, and finally collapses after being licked all over by them. At first glance, it might read like an absurd gag or a nightmare. However, for those of us who have followed this story since the first night, the true nature of despair hidden behind this surreal comedy becomes visible. This time, we will approach the true horror this story presents from the perspective of the bystander in the safety zone and the cruel contrast from the first night.
Perspective 1. The sin of the safety zone at the fruit storefront.
First, let's look back at the daily life of the protagonist, Shotaro. Wearing a Panama hat, he would sit at the storefront of a fruit shop in the evening and gaze at the beautiful women passing by. He critiques the beautiful fruit, saying, "This color is nice," but he has never once spent his own money to buy any. Here lies the karma that he has burdened himself with, consuming only the beauty of others and the surface of life without ever hurting his own wallet. He is a man who refuses to get his hands dirty and become an active participant, merely watching the world from a safe place while wearing a beautiful persona, the Panama hat. Perspective 2. The fate of the one who couldn't jump, the counterattack of the pigs and the masses. To such a bystander, Shotaro, the woman presses him on the cliff. Try jumping down from here. This is an existential demand to take a risk and dive into your own life. However, Shotaro takes off his Panama hat and repeatedly declines. What happened the moment he ran away from becoming an active participant? The raw reality and muddy human desires that he had avoided facing take the form of the pigs he loathes most and come surging toward him endlessly. What is important here is the description in the story. that Shotaro absolutely hated pigs and kumoemon. Kumoemon refers to a traditional narrative singer, rokyoku performer, who was wildly popular at the time. He was deeply despised by intellectuals who valued high culture as cheap, tear-jerking, lowbrow mass entertainment. In other words, pigs and kumoemon are symbols of the shallow masses who do not think for themselves. After desperately resisting with his walking stick, he collapses, licked by the pigs. In the end, he is licked all over and swallowed up by the vulgar masses he was supposed to be looking down upon from his safety zone while pretending to be refined. He is not eaten alive, but licked all over. That was the moment when he, who was supposed to be in a safe zone, was dragged down to the rock bottom of muddy desires, and his dignity as a human being was completely stripped away. Perspective 3. A cruel contrast with the first night, the day I became Ken-san. However, the true horror of this 10th night does not lie in the herd of pigs. It lies in the position of the narrator of this dream. In the first night, the narrator, I, was the protagonist of a profoundly beautiful world, waiting entirely alone by the grave, believing the dying woman's words, "Please wait for 100 years." Furthermore, the first night and other early nights began with the famous, mystical opening line, "I had a dream like this." Yet in reality, this final night lacks the preamble, "I had a dream like this," entirely. The barrier separating dreams and reality is already broken, and the story begins abruptly, just like a vulgar, real-world piece of gossip. As a result, what has become of him, the former protagonist, in this 10th night? He has degenerated into a complete third party, merely listening to Shotaro's tragic end as gossip from his acquaintance, Ken-san. Upon hearing of Shotaro's death, Ken-san consumes even another person's death as a shallow moral lesson and materialistic greed, saying, "So it's not good to look at women too much. More importantly, I want Shotaro's Panama hat." And the narrator, I, also simply agrees, thinking, "I thought he was right. The Panama hat will probably belong to Ken-san." And the story ends. The I, who once possessed a spirituality deep enough to wait 100 years, has fallen by the final night into becoming part of the masses who merely consume the misfortune of others as gossip. This loss of the subject is exactly the greatest downfall since the first night. In conclusion, unable to be the protagonist, even in a dream. The I who loved deeply and suffered as an active participant in his own life in the first night. What he arrived at in the final night was the image of himself having become just a bystander, part of the masses, just like Ken-san, consuming the misfortune of others as gossip and coldly observing from a safe distance. Even in the dream world, he can no longer be the protagonist. The Panama hat may be a cursed baton passed down from the dead Shotaro to Ken-san and eventually to myself. Why did Soseki choose to end the beautiful beginning of the dreams with such a dry landscape of a vulgar mass society? Next time is finally the compilation edition summary video that unravels the mystery piercing through the entirety of 10 Nights of Dreams. How did Soseki foresee the modernizing human being and the ultimate destination of mass society through these 10 dreams? We will approach its terrifying full scope. Please stay with us until the very end. Interpretation Experiment Compilation. Our Nightmare, foretold by Natsume Soseki. The fate of mass society depicted in 10 Nights of Dreams, when the disjointed dreams connect. I had a dream like this. Natsume Soseki's 10 Nights of Dreams begins with this famous opening line. It is a collection of 10 absurd, beautiful, and sometimes terrifying dreams. At first glance, these might seem like a merely chaotic dream diary. However, for those of us who have deeply interpreted them in order from the first night, a terrifying timeline hidden within becomes visible. In truth, 10 Nights of Dreams is a historical panorama by Soseki, depicting how the Japanese spirit loses its beauty, deteriorates, and finally plummets into the desperate hell of mass society as the nights progress from the first to the second and third. It was a cruel prophecy of the future. This time, we will explore the trap of modernization and our ultimate fate that Soseki foresaw through all 10 nights. Phase 1. The nights of struggling as an active participant. First to third nights. In the early stages of the story, the dream world was still filled with profound spirituality and mystery. In the first night, the narrator, I, was the protagonist of a deeply beautiful love, waiting entirely alone, believing the dying woman's words, "Please wait for 100 years." In the following second night, he sits in Zen meditation, trying to attain enlightenment, and in the third night, he cowers and agonizes over the weight of the sin, the blind child, he bears on his own back. The I of this period was always an active participant in his own life. There was a firm subject that faced its own soul and struggled desperately while bleeding. Phase 2. The fall from ideals and the giant ship, 4th to 7th nights. However, as the nights deepen, that subjectivity gradually begins to waver. In the 4th night, the old man who went into the river, saying his towel would turn into a snake, never returned. Here, an unidentifiable sense of loss, like a gaping hole, sprouts within the eye. Then comes the 5th night. In the midst of battle, the I who tried to rush to his beloved on horseback falls into the despicable trap of an Amanojaku, a wicked demon, failing to reach his goal before dawn. What is depicted here is a feeling akin to resignation towards fate, nowhere to go, negative emotions, and resentment. He decisively tumbles down from the noble ideal of believing in pure love, having sworn to wait for 100 years in the first night. Tormented by loss and resignation, in the 6th night, he realizes that he, a man of the Meiji era, lacks even the subjective creative power of someone like Unkei. The destination reached by the modern man who gave up the ideal of standing on his own and lost his creativity. That is the giant ship he cannot get off in the 7th night. Put on the ship of westernization and modernization without knowing where it is heading, feeling alienated among the surrounding Westerners and losing sight of himself, the I cannot bear it and jumps into the dark sea. This act of voluntarily dropping out, unable to endure the ship of modern society that charges ahead at breakneck speed without a clear destination, deeply overlaps with the fate of Daisuke Nagai, the protagonist of Soseki's later novel, and then Sorekara. Depicted here is the loneliness of modern man, who, unable to blend in with the waves of society, becomes isolated and makes self-destructive choices. Where on earth are the Japanese people headed, having abandoned thinking for themselves, individualism, and tumbled off the wave of modernization? Phase 3. The bystander behind the screen and the encroachment of reality. 8th and 9th nights. After falling into the sea, the dream world decisively transforms. In the 8th night, the I, sitting in a barber's chair, simply continues to gaze at the traffic outside through the mirror. The people passing by are no longer flesh and blood humans, but merely flat images reflected in the mirror.
Here the I has completely stopped interacting directly with the world, and bleeding.
He has transformed into a bystander who merely consumes the flowing images from a safe place. Is this not exactly how we today look at other people's lives through the screens of our smartphones? And then the 9th night. Here, even the mystical opening "I had a dream like this" finally disappears, and it closes with the confession, "I heard this sad story from my mother in a dream." Depicted here was the all-too-raw tragedy of war, a young mother performing the 100-fold shrine visit, unaware of her deployed husband's death, and the ignorant child sleeping on her back. The barrier separating dream and reality has now broken. The safety zone of dreams and ideals that existed in the first night has been completely lost, and the vulgar world of reality and raw despair have begun to completely encroach upon the story. Final phase, the march of pigs towards the cliff, 10th night. And so we reach the final night. The world that was once so beautiful has been reduced to an extremely shallow and materialistic world of Panama hats, pigs, and laughing at another's death. Shotaro, who posed as an intellectual and watched the world from a safety zone, is licked and swallowed by the pigs and kumoemon he most despised, that is, the desires of the masses who do not think for themselves. In fact, this Shotaro is a projection of Soseki himself, who looked down on the masses as vulgar. What is even more terrifying is the I who was once the protagonist. The man who was supposed to know the love of waiting 100 years in the first night fell from his ideals in the 5th night, and by the final night, he has completely fallen into being part of the masses, merely hearing of another's death as gossip from Ken-san, and consuming it as a shallow moral lesson. Conclusion: we are still walking today. Our souls, beginning from the first night, were lost night after night. Having fallen from the ship of modernization, we ceased to be active participants, let go of ideals and creativity, and became bystanders who merely consume other people's lives from a safe zone. The sight Soseki saw on the cliff after 7 days and 6 nights. Is that not the very image of ourselves today, having lost our own will, becoming a herd of faceless pigs marching straight toward the bottom of the cliff? A dream like this that Soseki saw over 100 years ago. It is an endless nightmare from which we, living today, still cannot awaken. This concludes the interpretation experiment of 10 Nights of Dreams. Thank you very much for joining us until the end of this long night's journey.